13 years ago, NATO bombed Libya to protect civilians. That was what they said. This led to thousands of deaths and a country in ruins. And I just want to give you a little brief history before I bring in our guest. On the 19th of March 2011, the NATO bloc began a violent 8-month-long military onslaught of Libya, a sovereign African Union founding member state, which had enjoyed 4 decades of stability and prosperity and one of the highest human development index scores in all of Africa. So we've said this before on this show that Libya was the most successful country in all of Africa. It was stable, had prosperity. Muammar Gaddafi brought that to the people. NATO's justification for the aggressive and bloody attack was the now infamous Protection of Civilians Doctrine, formalized under UN Security Council Decree number 1973. The French Air Force, however, had already initiated a major raid on immobile Libyan army units. They had already pulled out of the city of Benghazi, a protest hotbed, in a show of goodwill and peaceful intent. More than 400 resting Libyan officers, soldiers, medical and media personnel were massacred without the chance to fight back against an unjustified and undeclared foreign air attack. Tens of thousands more Libyans would later perish under more than 26,000 air raids, 100 cruise missile attacks, and a naval blockade conducted by NATO's 30-member coalition. Among the victims were a terrifying number of civilians from all walks of life. The number of women and children killed was especially high, as they sought refuge in civilian buildings deliberately targeted by the mighty NATO, including houses, apartment blocks, schools, and community centers. Where have I heard that most recently? As we witnessed time and time again in Iraq, Serbia, Afghanistan, and Syria, NATO justified these attacks by claiming they were seeking out fighters and weaponry housed in civilian facilities. No evidence of that has ever been presented. In fact, given its 12 years of total control over Libya, the land, the resources, the institution, the archives, the West has been unable to show the alleged 8,000 victims of rape by the Libyan army, nor the 10,000 murdered civilians, nor the neighborhoods of Tripoli allegedly destroyed by Muammar Gaddafi's Air Force, nor the African mercenaries supposedly imported by Gaddafi government in the first week of the Libyan Spring, which was February of 2011. The actual crimes of Libyan revolutionary government, however, were real and consequential. What were those crimes? Well, Gaddafi's Libya was reshaping the political, economic, and cultural context of the African continent in radical and independent ways, not seen since the nominal decolonization of African countries in the 50s and the 60s. So what Muammar Gaddafi was really doing was threatening Western hegemony by how? Well, Hillary's emails reveal the true motive for Libya's intervention.
Chris Cuomo said not to read those, Jimmy.
Newly disclosed emails show that Libya's plan to create a gold-backed currency to compete with the euro and the dollar was, in fact, the motive for NATO slaughtering innocent people, decapitating its leader, and turning Libya from one of the most successful countries in all of Africa with a stable government and a prosperous culture into a failed state with open slave trading.
Price of freedom, as Jon Stewart says.
That's exactly what happened. That's what NATO did. That's not what Putin did. That's not what Hamas did. That's not what ISIS did. That's not what Al-Qaeda did or the Taliban. That's what the French, the British, and the United States did. Again, I've said it on Tucker Carlson. I've said it on this show. I'll say it everywhere. The United States is the world's terrorists. There's no one else who can compare. I had a General Tata, on this show last week, and I asked him, is there another terrorist group in the entire world that has a bigger body count than the United States military? And of course, he couldn't answer that question, because if he did answer it honestly, he would be admitting that the United States, exactly as I said, is the world's terrorists. So today, let me bring in Moussa Ibrahim. He's a Libyan political figure who rose to international attention in 2011 as Muammar Gaddafi's information minister and his official spokesperson. serving in this role until the government was overthrown in this Libyan civil war. This week marks the 13th anniversary of NATO's attack on Libya. After the war, Ibrahim fled the country. Please welcome Moussa Ibrahim.
Thank you, Jimmy. Very honored to be with you today to discuss this very important issue and to have this dialogue with you and your esteemed guest. Could you remind me of the name of your friend there?
My co-host name is Kurt Metzger.
How you doing, buddy?
So,
Hi. I'm very honored to be with you tonight.
So, Moussa, I was quoting from some of your article. I was quoting also from an article from Foreign Policy Journal, and so tell me, what would you like to say on this 13th anniversary of one of the worst NATO atrocities in recent memory?
Well, Jimmy, let me first start by saying I salute you. I have such great respect for you. I have been listening to you for many years now, and I was surprised to see a voice like yours in the American mediascape, a very false mediascape full of lies and narrative that supports genocides and invasions and the killings of millions of people, and I really do mean millions of people in the global south. And I think what you do is important, influential, and I think recently especially, many more people have been listening to you, and I think you do help people to have a critical perspective of their political, economic, and social reality, not just in the United States of America, but around the world. And secondly, I think what is most important today to discuss is this very idea that we do need to have this critical perspective of what is going on around us. We need to understand why there are so many wars, so much violence, invasions, and so much injustice. Not just in the Middle East, but also in the whole of Africa, the global south, and even in Europe, as it is what is happening with the Ukraine. And I think at the root of everything is a global system of greed. This is the very root of injustice and violence around the world. There is a global system that sustains itself on profit making. And for that end, it's prepared to do anything. It doesn't have this global system of greed. It doesn't have a moral center. It doesn't have a spiritual heart. All it has is this beastly lust for money and profit making. And for that, it needs to rob lands. It needs to rob continents and countries. It needs to rob oil, gold, iron, gas, everything that is valuable to serve not even the people of the rich center of the world, i.e. the West, but to serve only the 1% elite in this center. So even the American people, for example, the European nations are not benefiting from these wars and from this greed. And what happened in Libya, dear Jimmy, is a very powerful example. Libya is a very rich country. It has a really wonderful natural resources that were owned by American and British companies, especially up to 1969, when Gaddafi led his green revolution, as we call it in Libya. And within 1 year of him coming to power, he ordered and obliged all American and British companies to hand back the national wealth of Libya to Libyans. Something, of course, that angered the West against Gaddafi, and he became an enemy, a top enemy to the Western greed machine. Also within
can I
6 months.
Can I just stop you for a second?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
And let me just make a parallel, because what you just said was that Muammar Gaddafi his idea was to keep the wealth of Libya, which is not a poor country. the way they make you want, and keep that wealth for the Libyan people. And the same thing happened similar in 1953 in Iran, when the president of Iran was democratically elected, wanted to keep the oil for their people and the oil profits. Well, the CIA couldn't have that, and they did a coup and they overthrew him, and they installed a puppet called the Shah. And then the people eventually revolted against that, and they installed a right-wing theocracy, which is called, the CIA calls that blowback. So the CIA, when they do something like that, when they overthrow and decapitate a government so that Western companies can come in and steal their natural resources, the people eventually revolt back against that. And that's how you get the theocracy we have in Iran today, instead of a thriving democracy that they had in the 50s. And that's because of the United States, again, being the world's terrorists and going in and stealing other people's natural resources. Absolutely. And so Muammar Gaddafi made the great mistake, the similar mistake of trying to do right by his own people and keep the wealth of Libya for the Libyan people. And of course, the West is not going to put up with that. And that's why ever since I was a kid, they've tried to turn Muammar Gaddafi into an enemy of the United States, even though he wasn't. The United States was the enemy of the people of Libya.
I don't even think it's American company. I think we did that for British companies.
Did it for British companies.
And then Libya, we did that for Sarkozy. That was the French got promised a lot of their oil by the rebels, didn't they?
I'm not sure, but let's go back to our guest.
Absolutely. It's the same story happened in Iran with the democratically elected president Mossadegh. It happened in Egypt with Nasser, who nationalized the Suez Canal, which is the main national wealth of Egypt. And Egypt was then attacked by France, the UK, and Israel in 1956 as a punishment for the nationalization of the Suez Canal. Similar stories happened in the Congo with the great leader of liberation, Patrice Lumumba, and in other regions of the continent. So what happened is that Gaddafi was leading a genuine project of liberation, not just for Libya, but for the whole continent of Africa.
Yes.
I actually, Jimmy, had the privilege to work with Gaddafi on some of these projects in Africa. The most important one was the building up of the gold reserve in the continent in collaboration between Libya, Ghana, the Congo, Senegal, and other gold-producing African countries, with the aim to issue a unified African currency. Gaddafi wanted to call it the Afro as opposed to the Euro, and it will be supported by gold, not by the dollar, which of course would have consisted which have represented the greatest threat to the West's dominance over Africa. Also, Gaddafi was funding with hard cash the establishment of the African Central Bank to be based in Tripoli. Many of your viewers may not know that, but more than 19 countries in Africa do not have proper central banks. They keep all of their funds in the French central bank. Gaddafi said, no, we cannot have this anymore. We have to have our own central bank. And also Gaddafi was funding the establishment of the African Unified Army to replace the AFRICOM, the American forces in the west of the continent, and the French G5S military force. So Gaddafi was liberating Africa, helping to liberate Africa again, and helping to get rid of the West's dominance in the continent. Now, I was also a witness that the Europeans and the Americans warned Gaddafi against this. They sent him delegations, members of the Congress, politicians, diplomats in 2008, 9, and 10, warning him against his African projects and telling him that this does not represent a friendly relationship with the West, and that he must stop these projects of liberations, as Gaddafi called them, because Gaddafi did not listen, and he paid the heavy price in 2011.
So I want to play this for you, and this gives you a little insight into the homicidal maniacs who run the United States and our military and the CIA. And so You have to remember the CIA doesn't work for the president of the United States. The CIA works for the international billionaire and globalist capitalists, right? And so that's why Chuck Schumer, the head of the Democratic Party, in 2016 went on MSNBC Rachel Maddow's show and warned President Trump not to mess with the CIA because the CIA actually runs things and it's not the president. So that he said that in bold-faced terms right on. That's called a gaffe when you tell the truth in Washington, D.C. So that was a big gaffe for Chuck Schumer. And he thought he was dunking on Donald Trump by saying Donald Trump's being stupid for messing with the CIA. But everybody at home was thinking, wait a minute, I thought the CIA actually works for the president. No, it's actually the opposite. The CIA works for the global billionaire class and the global capitalists of the West, and they don't work for the president. And they're there. That's the permanent state, the deep state. They're there forever, and they don't work for people who get elected. They help choose the people who get on your vote. So this is what happened after 9/11. General Wesley Clark revealed the real game of why the United States has gone into Iraq and Libya and Syria and Somalia and Yemen. Here's the real reason.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you gotta come in. You gotta come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
So they had a plan for this all along, and then they invent the reasons to do it. That's the real. So, and by this is called Project for a New American Century. This is the maniacs in the West, the capitalists. You can put them up on the screen. These are those people who think that it's their right to go slaughtering people, overthrowing governments, and murdering people for profit and hegemony and imperialism. And that's a general. That is a general who ran for president in the United States, General Wesley Clark. And that they never show you that on corporate news here in America. They'll never tell you about that in the New York Times or Jeff Bezos' own Washington Post or the military-industrial complex-funded CNN, Fox News, or MSNBC. But I will show it to you here on YouTube until they kick me off. And so does the rest of the world know about this? So that's my question. Like, so the people in Libya, the people in Africa, the people, do they know that the United States is the country that is the real terrorists and it's not anybody else, correct?
Most of my work, dear Jimmy, is in the continent of Africa. Even as we speak now, I'm the executive secretary of a Pan-African foundation called the African Legacy Foundation, which includes families of great African leaders of liberation, from Mandela to Nkrumah to Lumumba, Nasser and Nyerere and many others. And in my work in Africa, I can assure you, people are aware of the evil committed by the Western centers of hegemonies. And they know, more than that, they know that this does not involve the everyday people of America or the West. They know this is only serving the elites, the 1%, the top 1%, and that whatever wealth is stolen from Africa, whatever natural resources goes into the pockets of the billionaires and the multinational corporations with their centers in European and American cities. The awareness is there. What we actually would like in the global South, in Latin America, Africa, and South Asia, is for normal, ordinary people in the States and Europe to start a popular movement, a movement that rejects this injustice that harms everyone in the globe, that destroys the planet in terms of the environment, in terms of the security conditions of our planet. I mean, at this very moment, as we speak, there is a real risk, Jimmy, that we would go into a nuclear war that would destroy our beautiful planet, the only home we have in this vast space. And yet, the mainstream media in your country of America is pushing for this war to go ahead. They are antagonizing Russia, a nuclear power. They are paying and funding the continuation of this war for the benefit of the pockets of the few. While this war, if it breaks out, a nuclear war, it would destroy everyone and every city in the West. So the people of Africa are aware, they are very critical of the West. What we are hoping for is that a popular movement, a critical one, starts in your own country, that people start rejecting Biden and the Democrats and the Republicans and start forming a new line of politics of unity, not of division between blacks and whites and straights and gays, but a politics of unity between all workers, employees, the poor, the people who are down, who are not part of the 1%. And then I think nations of the world can stop this injustice, this ugliness, this violence, and this threat to the lives of millions around the world with nuclear wars and nuclear weapons. This is my opinion, Jimmy.
So I share your hope that happens. Now, the problem that we run into is that whenever people try to stand up against the establishment, whether it be here or Canada or anywhere else, they immediately criminalize those people. Like, for instance, they did to the truckers in Canada, who were the most peaceful protesters I've ever seen. They immediately called them white supremacists and Nazis and said they were violent, and they froze their bank accounts. And not only did they freeze their bank accounts and put people in jail illegally, they declared a national emergency so they could do so, which was now recently been declared by the Canadian Supreme Court as being unconstitutional. When they did that, of course, no one's going to have to pay a price for that. So in the United States, Barack Obama got rid of habeas corpus, which means that if you get arrested, they have to charge you with a crime, and you have a right to know what those charges are, and you have a right to a speedy trial. They've gotten rid of that in the United States. And so that's why look what they're doing to Julian Assange, right? There's no credible charges against him. They've kept him locked up for years and years, and in a slow torture and a slow death. That's what the United States does. And they did that because he did journalism, because he revealed their war crimes. And so in the United States, if somebody does stand up against them, well, look what they did to Russell Brand most recently, right? That was obviously a hit job in coordination with the government and the corporate media owned by the billionaire class, the same billionaires that did Libya, the same billionaire class that did Iraq, that did Syria, that did a 20-year occupation of Afghanistan, committed a genocide in Yemen, is now funding a genocide in Gaza. Those are the same people. They have the power, right? So as soon as I talk to somebody, with the only thing that scares the establishment and the oligarchy, because we live in an oligarchy in the United States. This is not a democracy, right? The elections are a sham. They are just for show. And it's been proven by a Princeton study over a decade ago that it doesn't matter who you vote for, what the elite want, they get. Right. And no matter what the workers want, their will is never reflected back in legislation. So this is the definition of an oligarchy we're living in. And if you try to stand up against that oligarchy, the only thing that scares them is when people from the left, like me, and people from the right come together and oppose them. And so they do. So they do everything.
Unity is what scares them. And that's why I like your discourse. I've been listening to you. I think people on the left who are against the system, so they have the right moral and intellectual standing, they make a great mistake when they attack people on the right. And I think people on the right make the same mistake when they attack people on the left. I think both parties, like both people on the left and right, they have similar concerns. They want justice. They want the wealth to be distributed to the people. They want to get rid of the top 1%. They have similar concerns about security, about wars, about the military complex in America. They have different methods of understanding, different approaches, but what they need to concentrate on and emphasize is unity. What the system fears is people coming together for the common good of all. And Jimmy, I'm not being over-optimistic. Remember, your people in your country have achieved a lot in the last, let's say, 100, 150 years. I mean, you have ended slavery, for example. You have given women so many rights. You have given ethnic minorities rights. You have achieved so much for workers, for example, in terms of health conditions, working hours. There are many things that were achieved because of the work of many, many people on the ground, year after year, generation after generation. I do believe that what you do, for example, on your YouTube channel is very important and influential. And if you just continue with your discourse of unity and encourage many more to come through, I mean, we saw what happened with Trump, how he challenged the system, and many people felt that they needed to completely dismantle the system, and they surprised both Republicans and Democrats. Yes, maybe Trump is not the right solution, but he was an expression of anger, an expression of feeling of desperation and people wanting to come together. And I think the left made a big mistake when they laughed and ridiculed Trump supporters. I think the left would have done much better if they reached out to Trump supporters and had a dialogue with them and understood their anger and frustration. We need to have this feeling of brotherhood and sisterhood between us, because again and again, unity is our most powerful weapon against the system.
So every once in a while in America, on American television, someone will break through and tell the truth about why people voted for Donald Trump. It was Michael Moore at first, and then he stopped doing that because he's cowardly. And then it was Chris Matthews who did it on election night in 2016 when they were all saying that these are just racists and white nationalists that Trump has tapped into. And the same people who voted for Barack Obama twice voted for Donald Trump. And so Chris Matthews laid it out to them and said, the reason why people are voting for Donald Trump, if you've driven through Michigan, if you've driven through Wisconsin, the entire economic system has been hollowed out. They've closed their businesses. People are desperate. The only thing that remains are the diners. And so when they're against illegal immigration in the United States that suppresses wages, and they're also against these wars. And so that's why people voted for Donald Trump. Well, I don't know if you know what happened to Chris Matthews after he said that. Short time there afterwards, he was forced out of his job on a trumped-up charge of sexual harassment. That's what they would use back then, and so they used it against him. They can't use that anymore because now Joe Biden has been credibly accused of rape. And so that's when they stopped believing women. As soon as their big warmonger in chief got the nomination for the presidency, then they stopped believing all women. But up until then, so that's what happened with Chris Matthews. I showed that most recently on my show on Sunday, that Chris Matthews on election night in 2016, when everybody from Rachel Maddow and Tom Brokaw were sitting there saying these are all white racists and these are white nationalists and these are the worst people in the world, Chris Matthews stood up and said, no, the reason why they're doing this is because they want to end the wars. They want to have a better economic life. And the system isn't serving these people, which is why they're willing to take a chance on a billionaire game show host who's a political novice named Donald Trump. And Michael Moore was saying the same thing at the same time. He stopped saying that. So now he's invited back on corporate TV in the United States because he pretty much big coward. But I haven't stopped saying it. They've tried to stop me. They've put me on the front page of magazines and called me the dirtbag leftist and said that I'm in bed with white nationalists and racists and all that. They've done that. That's the game that they play. And, you know, back in when the stock market crashed in the United States in 2008, 2009, the right wingers on the started a group called the Tea Party, and they were opposing the oligarchs. And then Occupy Wall Street happened, so we had the left and the right both angry at Wall Street and the elites that control our politics and our war machine. And so they saw that them coming together with a common purpose. And so they immediately got their billionaire-owned media to divide those people. And the way they did it was they told people on the left that the people on the right were Nazis and white supremacists, and they hate gay people, and that they're your enemy. That's how they did it. And they told the people on the right that the people on the left wanted to control you like communists, and they wanted to censor you. And so they got them to hate each other and to divide. And so now they've done it. It's complete, right? And so even though Donald Trump broke through in 2016 and he won, they've now criminalized him, just like they did in Brazil with Bolsonaro, just like they did with Imran Khan in Pakistan. Anybody who stands up against the establishment, especially the war machine, which is what happened in Pakistan, they immediately make you a criminal. Donald Trump is the only president in my lifetime that didn't start another war. And so they impeached him because he paused a shipment of weapons to Ukraine. So the only reason, one of the big reasons to vote for Donald Trump is now an impeachable offense in the United States. And people don't realize that the American people in America don't realize that Americans are the most propagandized people in the entire world, bar none, because people in China, when they know they're being propagandized, people in the United States think when they turn on the TV, they're getting the real news. They don't think for a second it's propaganda, but it is. Of course, that's why we were able to go into Libya. We were able to go into Iraq. We were able to go into Syria. We were able to occupy Afghanistan for 20 years. Even after the Afghanistan papers came out and revealed it was 20 years of complete lies from 4 different administrations. Nothing but lies about Afghanistan. Nothing, just like Vietnam, 4 different presidents, they lied to you. Just same thing with Afghanistan. They did it to Iraq twice. They did it to Libya, Syria, Somalia. Now we're doing it in Gaza and within Ukraine. Ukraine, again, they never tell you the truth about what's happening. And guys like Jon Stewart, who people think are straight shooters because he's a comedian, will never tell you the truth about what we did in Libya, what we're doing in Ukraine, what's actually the game that's being played, because he would be kicked off their television because it's owned by the people who are doing those things. And so that's why shows like this, you're exactly right. I explained before you came on that last Sunday we did a live event, and we had a person who was MAGA, which is a Donald Trump supporter, and a bona fide Marxist come together center stage and hug each other because they realize that their problems are the same and we share a common enemy. And that's the only thing that scares people, which is why people hate this show as much as they hate it, because there are other shows who pretend to represent the left and the right, like Breaking Points with Sagar and Crystal, and those are liars and fakers and pretenders. They don't represent the people. They represent the establishment. And we actually represent the people, which is why people hate us here. Hey, come see us do a live stand-up show. We're going to be in Stockholm, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, London, Oslo, Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Cortland, New York, Oakmont, Pennsylvania, El Paso, Texas, San Antonio, Texas, Edmonton, Alberta, Vancouver, British Columbia, and Denver, Colorado. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for those tickets.